True crime is likely more popular today than it's ever been before. Load up your Netflix front page, check what's new or popular at the time, and many of those entries are likely to be about serial killers or related to true crime in some way. Between podcasts, CSI-style TV shows, documentaries, and more, it's never been easier to learn about or be entertained by the actions of violent criminals and serial killers. Well, in today's video, as you probably figured out by the title, we'll take a look at my top 10 facts about serial killers. The actual number of victims murdered by Ted Bundy is still unknown. While Ted Bundy initially denied involvement in any murders at all for more than a decade, eventually he did confess to 30 specific murders. While 30 people is obviously a lot, investigators suspect he likely killed even more. Since Ted Bundy is now dead, as he was executed via electric chair on January 24, 1989, he can of course no longer be interviewed to try to determine the true number of his victims. Before Bundy's death, amid questioning with investigators, Bundy was asked, "Did you kill 36 people?" He replied, "Add one digit to that and you'll have it." Now, it's not entirely clear what he meant by that. He could have meant 37 instead of 36. However, he also could have been implying that he's murdered 136 women, or 360 women, depending on where that extra digit is added. Now, Bundy clearly was a prolific serial killer, but hundreds of murders does seem pretty far-fetched. If I had to guess, I'd say Bundy certainly killed more than the 30 he initially confessed to, but far less than 100. Maybe in the realm of 40 murders, but who knows for sure. The most common motive driving serial killers to continue committing murders is a feeling of power. Unfortunately, nobody can provide a clear, ubiquitously applicable answer to the question, why do serial killers kill? As every situation is unique, and many different motives exist. Some are motivated by their own psychological compulsions, often sexual in nature, but most often, the primary motivation for a serial killer to continue killing involves chasing a feeling of power over their victims. In order to maximize that payoff, serial killers often prey on the least powerful among us, such as children, prostitutes, smaller women, homeless people, and more. Not only do serial killers see these types of victims as inherently less powerful than them, it's also the least powerful and most downtrodden among us that are the least prioritized by the police when it comes to homicide investigations. Discovering multiple prostitutes murdered, for example, is likely to get far less media attention than other types of higher profile victims, thus not putting much pressure on the police to solve those cases. Unfortunately, every life is not viewed as equal by law enforcement and the media. For fact 3, let's just keep this short and sweet. There's no way you can really dress this fact up as anything other than the obviously gruesome. When John Wayne Gacy was caught, many true crime fans are aware that his victims' corpses were found underneath his house. However, a key piece of information has been left out there. When 33 victims' bodies were exhumed from their suburban graveyard, the corpses were so tightly packed that the bodies had become fused together, and it took over 2 years to untangle that forensic mess and assign each bone to a single corpse. In fact, not every body was identified. As recently as 2011, more than 30 years after Gacy was caught, detectives exhumed the bones of 8 unidentified men in hopes of finally determining their names. Actually, the only skeletal remains from those unknown victims that were preserved after the initial autopsy were their upper and lower jaws, including their teeth. They were saved in case dental records from the victims ever became available. When one detective flew with those 8 sets of jaws from a Chicago area medical examiner's office to a lab in Texas, the preserved jaws were in his carry-on bag. I can't imagine explaining that to TSA. If you had to guess how many serial killers are active in the US today, what number would you come up with? According to the FBI, there are 25 to 50 active serial killers in the United States at any one time, and will never be caught. However, one could make the argument that the FBI estimation is potentially quite a bit lower than the real number. For one, there are many types of victims that are either harder to connect to a potential serial killer, or, unfortunately, their deaths are taken less seriously. Victims that are homeless or prostitutes are especially vulnerable to this style of bias. For this reason, serial killers that target either the homeless or prostitutes are probably significantly underestimated. The behavior of the killer also influences this. Transient serial killers who constantly travel from region to region are far more difficult to detect than those that remain in one city. For example, Samuel Little is an alleged transient serial killer who confessed to more than 90 killings. Many of Little's victims were not even considered to be victims of serial murder and were often assumed to be the result of overdose or exposure, as many of their corpses weren't found until months or years later. The Green River Killer is well known for his many precautions and attempts to cover his tracks by buying new car tires after using his vehicle in relation to a homicide, and destroying and replacing his shoes after potentially leaving shoe prints near a crime scene. This killer would often leave airport or motel pamphlets at his crime scenes to send the police down random rabbit holes, aiding his ability to avoid detection. The Green River Killer was known for targeting prostitutes, which isn't unusual. However, he would collect the jewelry from his victims and leave it in the women's bathroom at his work site because he got a thrill out of seeing his female co-workers wearing his victims' jewelry. While the Green River Killer did take more precautions than the average homicidal maniac, ultimately it still wasn't enough to avoid detection indefinitely, as a breakthrough in DNA technology eventually led to the arrest of Gary Ridgway, the Green River Killer himself. Robert Hansen, known in the media as the Butcher Baker, took the life of at least 17 women in and around Anchorage, Alaska. While his number of victims isn't the highest I've ever seen, his killing ritual was particularly disturbing in a unique way. Robert would kidnap women in Alaska, then turn them loose in the wilderness of Alaska and hunt them down like wild animals. He was essentially a serial killer for sport. His MO prior to sending the women into the wilderness also involved extreme violence of a sexual nature, the details of which are likely not fit for YouTube. Safe to say, this guy was a total psychopath. He was sentenced to 461 years behind bars in the 1980s, but died in 2014 of natural causes, age 75. This one is pretty crazy. I'm sure many of you have heard of the BTK killer, aka Dennis Rader. Well, from 1974 until 1988, Rader worked at a Wichita-based office of ADT Security Services, a home security company. Part of his job was to install home security alarms at the homes of people who request them. Many of his clients had booked the company specifically to stop the BTK killer from ever entering their homes, unaware that BTK himself was installing them. As a result of BTK's inside knowledge of the inner workings of these alarm systems, he would come back to these houses later and disable the alarm systems that he installed in order to rape and murder the occupants. David Berkowitz, also known as the Son of Sam, terrorized New York City in the mid to late 70s with his 8 highly publicized murders by firearm. Berkowitz eluded the biggest police manhunts in the city's history while mocking the police and promising further murders in various letters that were shared in newspapers all over the city. However, Berkowitz has been imprisoned and eligible for parole since 2002. Since then, he's consistently asked to remain in prison or simply skipped his parole hearings altogether. When asked in 2016 how he's changed, he responded by saying, "I am no risk whatsoever." Apparently, Son of Sam has been a model prisoner according to prison staff, and even graduated with honors from Sullivan Community College. Berkowitz is even known to counsel fellow prisoners after converting to evangelical Christianity in 1987. He's since changed his name from Son of Sam, in reference to his claim that a demon in the form of his neighbor Sam's dog instructed him to kill, to his new name, Son of Hope. Edmund Kemper is a well-known sociopathic serial killer who happens to have an extremely high IQ, around 145, placing him in the highly gifted category. Kemper ended up murdering a total of 10 people. One of his victims included his own mother. The details of his actions with their corpse are disgusting and extremely graphic, so I won't go into detail here. Regardless, while in prison, Kemper narrated hundreds of books on tape for the blind. He also spent time in prison helping state psychologists learn to understand psychopaths more thoroughly, partially by helping them form questionnaires for future use. Kemper has played particularly well in the Netflix series Mindhunter, so if you're interested, feel free to check that show out. Speaking of Ed Kemper, after abducting and pulling a gun on a young woman, Kemper left his car to get something out of the trunk. However, he accidentally left his keys in the car, locking himself out with the abducted woman still inside. Words were exchanged between the two, and after some deliberation, she unlocked the door and let Kemper back inside, ultimately resulting in her death as he murdered her shortly after. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed that gruesome assortment of facts about serial killers. My channel is new, and if you're interested, I'll be posting lots of creepy stories, mysteries, Reddit deep dives, true crime, and more. If any of that interests you, feel free to subscribe. Anyway, thanks for watching.